marvelous God. We find ourselves today in Exodus chapter 10 in the middle of a 10-round heavyweight bout between the Pharaoh of Egypt, the powerful Pharaoh of Egypt, and Almighty God. At this point where we pick up in Exodus chapter 10, God is ahead 8-0. Pharaoh has just stood there with his hands in his pocket while God has just disciplined and punched him and punished him and his people and the nation of Egypt. And he's just stood there and he's called out over and over and over. He's got one simple message. God has one simple message for Pharaoh, and it is, let my people go. That's all I want you to do, Pharaoh, is to let my people go. Chapter 10 starts, Then the Lord said to Moses, Go to Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the hearts of his officials, so that I may do these miraculous signs of mine among them, and so that you may tell your son and your grandson how severely I dealt with the Egyptians and performed miraculous signs among them, and you will know that I'm Yahweh. I have done these signs, but I'm not quite done yet. Remember the score at this point is 7. Did I say 8? No. Thanks. 7-0. Still a shutout. Amazingly, Pharaoh still thinks he's doing a pretty good job in this fight because the Israelites are still there in the land. He's the Pharaoh. He doesn't want the Israelites to leave, and they're still there, so he thinks he's still doing pretty good in this bout. The score is 7-0. So the bell sounds for the beginning of round 8 in verse 3. So Moses and Aaron went in to Pharaoh and told him, This is what Yahweh, the God of the Hebrews, says. How long? How long will you refuse to humble yourself before me? Let my people go that they may worship me. From 2 weeks ago, we see that same theme again. That's title of the message 2 weeks ago was, How long? How long are you going to continue down this path, this wrong path? I could re-preach that message. Pharaoh, I want you to humble yourself before me. The ball is in your court. How long do you want to continue sparring with me as God? Verse 4, But if you refuse to let my people go, then tomorrow I will bring locusts into your territory. You almost wonder, after the things that Pharaoh's just gone through, you almost wonder if Pharaoh thought, now locusts, that doesn't sound too bad. How bad can some locusts be? That doesn't sound like that could be as disruptive as some of those other things. And Moses says, No, Pharaoh, you don't understand. Verses 5 and 6, Sir, they will cover the surface of the land so that no one will be able to see the land. Those locusts will eat the remainder left to you that escaped by the hail back in round 7. They will eat every tree you have growing in the fields. They will fill your houses, all of your officials' houses, and the houses of all the Egyptians, something your fathers and ancestors never saw since the time they occupied the land until today. Then Moses turned and he left Pharaoh's presence. Pharaoh, you've never seen anything like this. It's interesting that early on Moses was kind of fearful and passive about going in front of Pharaoh. It seems like he's getting his courage up just a little bit here. He's starting to be more assertive. I'm out of here, he says. He turns and he walks away. No sooner had Moses walked out the door, verse 7. I've underlined a couple of these. Pharaoh's officials asked, they must have been at our church service a couple of weeks ago. Pharaoh's officials look at him and say, Sir, how long are you going to continue to allow this man to be a snare to us? Pharaoh, sir, we've tried to support you. We've tried to be there in your corner. But would you now let the men go so that they may worship their God? Don't you realize yet that Egypt is devastated? You get the sense that this happened in the spring, in the blossoming season. It started out, I imagine, Egypt started out looking like this. That was at the beginning, before the first plague. Now, a few weeks later, or however long it's taken to get to those, the officials say, Pharaoh, don't you see that the land is devastated? Looks like this. We started out like that, and this man, would you let these people go? Because their God has devastated our land. How long, sir, will you continue? Verse 8, so Moses and Aaron were brought back to Pharaoh. We hadn't seen that before. That's the difference. I'd said that every round has something unique. This is the first time that before the plague happened, the official said, would you call him back in here and let's see if we can work something out. So Moses and Aaron were brought back to Pharaoh. Go worship your God, Pharaoh said. But now, hang on. But tell me again, just exactly who is it that's going to be going? And then verse 9, go ahead. Moses replied, we will be going with our young and our old, and with our sons and our daughters and our flocks and our herds, because we're going to go out there and we're going to hold a festival for our God Yahweh. Everybody's going, including the animals. So much for Pharaoh's brief moment of sanity. Verses 10 and 11, he said to them, may Yahweh be with you if I ever let you and your families go. Look, you're planning evil. Let me just say that this verse, if you look in the Hebrew, is difficult to interpret, but it probably sounded something like this. Look, if I let you all go, Yahweh will be with you. You aren't just going to go for 3 days. You'll be gone for good. This plan is evil. And so he says, no, you can't do that. Only the men can go and worship Yahweh, for that's what you've been asking for. And they were driven from Pharaoh's presence. Now, fathers and husbands, let me ask you this question. If your wife and children were in this situation in bondage to a ruthless dictator, who now has his back against the wall and has every opportunity to take revenge, what are the chances that you're going to take off on a three-day discipleship retreat? Zero chance. Was it going to happen? Not going to happen, Pharaoh. So Pharaoh says, get out of my presence. Verse 12, then the Lord said to Moses, okay, Moses, I mean, how familiar is this? I hope you're not yawning back there. How familiar is this? Moses, stretch out your hand over the land of Egypt, and the locust will come up over it and will eat every plant in the field, everything that the hail left. So Moses takes his staff and he stretches it out over the land of Egypt, and the Lord has sent an east wind from the east over the land, and all that day and through the night, by morning, the east wind had brought in the locusts. Verse 14. The locusts went up over the entire land of Egypt and settled on the whole territory of Egypt. Never before had there been such a large number of locusts, and there never will be again. They covered the surface of the whole land so that the land was black with locusts. And they consumed all the plants on the ground and all the fruit on the trees that happened to escape the hail that had just left. Nothing green was left on the trees or in the plants throughout the land Egypt. If Pharaoh had missed it before, Egypt was devastated and looked like this again. How long, Pharaoh? Look at how much we've had taken from us. Look at how barren our land is because our simple refusal to submit to God's plan for our lives and the people of Egypt. Verse 16, Pharaoh urgently sent for Moses and Aaron and said, I have sinned against Yahweh your God and against you. That sounds sincere enough, doesn't it? Maybe Pharaoh, maybe he's getting it by this point. Verse 17, please forgive my sin once more and make an appeal to Yahweh your God so that he will take this death from me. Once more, Moses, I did it again. How did this plague appear to Pharaoh? It appeared as death. Please take this death away from me. I see it now. I see that the choices and the decisions in my life have taken me and my great land from a place of blossoming beauty to devastation. Would you please take it away from me? Moses, verse 18, Moses left Pharaoh's presence, and once again he appealed to the Lord. Well, what do you do with that? Doesn't say that Moses said anything to Pharaoh, and he probably didn't believe Pharaoh anymore. He'd seen this about 6 or 7 times before already. God, it's me again. On behalf of Pharaoh, he's asking if you'll forgive him and take this plague away like you've taken the other ones away. He said that the plague feels like death. I don't know if he's sincere or not, God, but he asked me to ask. Man, just ask if any of you had those experiences before. Somebody asks you to pray for them and you have a sense that they're not really sincere, but you pray for them anyway. Verse 19, what did the Lord do with that prayer? Then the Lord changed the wind to be a western wind. And it carried off the locusts and blew them into the Red Sea. Not a single locust was left in all the territory of Egypt. The Lord changed the wind. Why? Because Yahweh is in charge of the wind. Today, 2019, God is in charge of the wind. The result, verse 20, but the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he did not let the Israelites go. The score, 8-0. Do you wonder why the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart? We saw that in verse 1. We saw it in verse 20. We're going to see it again. Why would the Lord harden Pharaoh's heart? We'll come to it. Hang with me. With no commercial break at all, we go straight into round 9, darkness. Verse 21, then the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand toward heaven, and there will be darkness over the land of Egypt, a darkness that can be felt. Now here's a first in round number 9. This is the first time that God just told Moses to do the plague without first going to Pharaoh and saying that it's coming. They came out of round number 8, and God told Moses, do round 9, don't even tell Pharaoh it's coming. And so Moses, verse 22, Moses stretched out his hand toward heaven, and there was thick darkness throughout the land of Egypt for 3 days. I want to say to you that the closest thing that I have experienced to that is on Wednesday nights when I'm hiding in the back closet playing hide and go seek with the lights off. With the kids, the parents are staying here practicing, and I'm playing hide and go seek with the kids. No, it's not one of their favorite places because it's dark in there. It's really dark. In fact, the picture of darkness, I took a picture this morning of being in that closet, and it's dark, and here's what it looked like. You can see a couple little flickering lights up there. That's for my wireless network stuff that's right on the other side of this wall. If the lights were closed back there, it was dark. It was pitch dark. You better turn this back on so I can see where I'm at. Pitch. Have you been in that darkness? Darkness that you can feel. When we go back there and hide, I'll turn on my flashlight so we have light when we get back there in our little spot, and then I turn off the flashlight. And it is pitch. You can feel the darkness. And those little kids, those are sissies. They're scared. They say, turn that light back on. In about 2 seconds, not me. It takes me 5 seconds to be scared of that dark. I mean we can feel. Verse 23, one person could not see another. It's that dark back there. You're welcome to go back there and have a field trip. Your church is over with. Shut that door. Ignore those little wireless lights. Darkness you can feel. One person could not see another, and for 3 days they did not move from where they were. 3 solid days of pitch black. It had to have been. Those little kids, little girls back there, when I turn that flashlight on, they squeal. And then I squeal right by. It had to have been a terrifying experience. Daddy, can you turn the light on? Can somebody turn a flashlight on? Can you start it? Can you can you burn a candle? We don't know where the matches are at. Daddy, I need to go to the bathroom. We'll feel your way. It was pitch black and darkness that you could feel. Into verse 21. One person could not see another, and for 3 days they did not move from where they were. Yet the Israelites had light where they lived. I just tell you, it's happened over and over. It's said a bunch of times, and every time it shows up, I'm just going to re-emphasize it. God shone His light on His people. It just makes me want to clap to the Lord with a jubilant song. Because I don't know how it always happens, and we may not see it immediately, but from the courts of heaven, God gives special treatment to His people. Amen. We just need to claim that, don't we? We just need to claim it and run with it. God, really, I don't deserve to be your special person. God, I understand that Clayton Houchins deserves to be separated from you forever in the place that the Bible calls hell. But because I've trusted your Son, Jesus, as my Savior, and I have asked you and your Son, Jesus, to take the penalty of my sins, your Word says that I am now forgiven, and I am your child, I am your son, I am a prince of God. God, would you treat me with special treatment like you did those people of the Israelites? God, would you, I'm claiming this, God. I'm asking you to shine your light on my life. God treats His people with special treatment and distinction. We've seen that in chapters 7 and 8 and 9. Amen. Just whisper that. Amen. I claim that for myself, and in prayer I claim that for you. Meanwhile, after 3 days of solid pitch black night, verse 24, Pharaoh summoned Moses and said, okay, Moses, go. Go worship Yahweh. Even your families may go with you. Only I would like your flocks and your herds. They must stay behind. We would probably call this partial obedience. I'm partially okay. I'm partially okay with the commands that God's given me, those specific directions. By the way, if you were in this situation and you own livestock that provided your livelihood, what are the chances you would leave it to this guy to babysit while you took your family on a camping trip? Not going to happen. Moses responded, nope, you must also let us have our sacrifices and burnt offerings to prepare for Yahweh our God. Even the livestock must go with us. Not a hoof will be left behind, because we will take some of them to worship Yahweh our God. We will not know what we will use to worship until we get there. Pharaoh, sir, we're not sure which of the animals that we're going to need to sacrifice when we get out there in the desert. All of the animals have got to go with us. Verse 27, how do you imagine Pharaoh responded? But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he was unwilling to let them go. You wonder why the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, don't you? We saw it in verse 1, we saw it in verse 20, we see it again here in verse 27. I'll come back to that in just a minute. Verse 28, Pharaoh said to him, leave me. Moses, you make sure that you never see my face again. For on the day you see my face, you will die. I'm tired of you. Every time you come here, you have bad news and you bring judgment on me. On the day that you come back, you will surely die. Verse 29, as you have said, Moses replied, I will never see your face again. The lines of communication have broken down. There are no more conversations. There is no more bargaining. Moses, every time you show up, it's to bring destruction and judgment. You tell me what I'm doing wrong and how I need to change. May I say to you as a Christian and as a preacher and as a messenger of the gospel, the good news, the best news in all of the world. Here it is. This is the best news in all of the world, is that God loves you and has a plan and a purpose for your life. Amen. The unfortunate side effect of that good news is that if a person stubbornly refuses to embrace that truth and they refuse to choose to obey that loving God, there are consequences. Moses was not trying to bring judgment on Pharaoh. God was not trying to bring judgment on Pharaoh. So Clayton, what was God trying to do when He kept hardening Pharaoh's heart? It's here in the text, and I glossed over it at the beginning. There's 3 points. In the first 2 verses, God answers that question. Verse 1, then the Lord said to Moses, go to Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart, and I have hardened the hearts of his officials. Why would God harden Pharaoh's heart? The end of verse 1 is the first reason. So that I may do these miraculous signs of mine among them. God says, I brought in this bag of miracles. And I want to make sure that Egypt sees all of my miracles. Now, my wife, you may not like this. My wife will tell me after church I shouldn't have said it. But I always said it in the New Testament. Jesus would do, the Pharisees would say to Him, we want to see one more magic trick. We want to see you do something miraculous. And God says, I've shown up with my bag of miraculous signs, and I want to make sure that everybody sees the miraculous signs that I have to share with the people. Because you see, Pharaoh and Egypt and the people of Egypt and the officials apparently still don't know me yet. I want Pharaoh to know that I'm in control of the water source, the amphibians, that's the frogs, the dust, that's the gnats, the insects, that's the flies, the animal kingdom, that's the diseased livestock in plague number 5, physical health and disease, that's boils, and I didn't spend much time on boils last week, but imagine those boils, I don't know if they scratched or itched or burned. What a brutal plague that was. Number 7, I'm also in charge of the hail. Can I just say this to you? I'm not trying to be clever or smart, but can I just say to you that if the God that you know about, if the God that you believe in, if the God that you worship is boring and uninvolved and dry and crusty, can I just challenge you to trade Him in for a marvelous, wonderful, awe-inspiring God? Get to know this God, the God who still today does the miraculous. He's still got the miraculous in His bag. The fabulous and wonderful God, the in charge of the world God. Get to know Him and watch Him and follow Him and serve Him and love Him. I'm doing this in Egypt, number 1, so I can show off. I want them to know that there is none. Number 2, the second reason is in verse 2. And so that you may tell your son and grandson how severely I dealt with the Egyptians and performed miraculous signs among them. You can bold that, and you can underline that, and you can circle it, and you can italicize it, and you can put the star in the margin. The reason I'm doing miraculous signs in your presence is so that you have something to tell to your son and your grandson. May I ask this morning, are you a parent? Do you want the best for your children? Do you want your children to be successful in life? May I say to you as a parent that the best thing in life that you can give to your children and your grandchildren is the personal testimony of how you watched God do miraculous things in your life. Tell them what God has done in your life. I could spend an hour right there. Maybe what you need to, maybe the decision that you need to make right now this morning is you need to decide that I'm going to ask God, hands in my pockets, God, I can't do it for myself. God, I'm going to ask you to give me a testimony that I can tell to my children and my grandchildren. God, would you do a miraculous thing in my life? Would you do a miraculous thing in my church? God, would you allow my name to be written on some of these rocks? This is our pile of rocks where God has answered our prayers. This one says Sharon Hayes. Her name is on a rock. Mike Hayes, have you seen God do a miraculous work in the life of your family? Just tell Alana. I don't think there's anything we can do better in our lives than to say, Johnny, Susie, come here. Do you remember how we prayed and we prayed and we prayed for this thing? God answered our prayer. We're going to write our name on a rock. We're going to celebrate. Little Alana, as you grow up, we want you to know the testimony of our lives. We want you to know where we were at, Miss Sharon, for those years. Mike, we want you to know where we were at for these years. We want you to know, Alana, look what God has done in our lives. I've done these miraculous things in your midst. Go back up, please. So that you can tell your son and your grandson what miraculous things I have done in your midst. Give that legacy to your children and your grandchildren. Hand that legacy to them. You could want the best things for your children. The best thing you can give your children is the testimony of how God has done miraculous works in your life. And I know well enough to know that there are some people sitting here in church this morning where, man, wouldn't it be great if God did a miraculous work in my life right now. May I just say to you, I'm praying, we're praying, thank you for praying, we're watching God do amazing stuff. We are praying for zero rent for our church. God, would you do something we're not expecting? Would you bless our church with zero rent? The most significant result of that, or any other miracle that happens, is so that we can brag on God to our children and our grandchildren. In 2019, that's why I did it 4,000 years ago, was so you'd have something to brag about. That's the same reason I'm doing it right now, is for you to give a legacy to your children and your grandchildren, so that our children and grandchildren might know God. That's the title of the message, is Knowing God. I want Egypt, I want Pharaoh to know God. I want your children and your grandchildren to know God. And the third reason is at the end of verse 2, so you can tell your son and your grandson, and so that you, Moses, will know, so that you will know, Moses, that I am Yahweh. I'm doing it for Pharaoh and for Egypt and for your children and for your grandchildren, but I'm also doing it for you, so that you will be convinced. Moses, this is for you as much as for anyone. I will just say to you that every other week here on Thursday nights now, the staff meets in the gather area and we plan events for our church. And we talk about what we should be doing. And every month the elder board meets in my office and we talk about the business of the church. May I just say, leadership of Church 247, staff of Church 247, do not miss it. What God wants more than anything else is for me to know Him. That's what He wants. He wants Clayton to see this awe-inspiring God that he stands up here on Sunday morning and talks about. He wants me to see His miraculous signs. He wants me to wonder and marvel and praise and point people to Him. There's a very fine line in our lives from our book. From Mark Batterson, we see the line all the time. It says, work like it depends on us and pray like it depends on God. Can I just say that what I really want to do is to watch with my hands in my pockets? God, I don't even really want to work like it depends on me. I just want to stand here with my hands in my pockets and watch you do miraculous works right in front of my face as though it only depends on you, not on my work. Can I tell you that there is work in progress? We've got this new property. We've got some money in the bank. We're talking to contractors. I want it to move as fast as possible. I will just say to you that I'm working as hard as I can possibly work. But what I'm praying is that God just does something. It wasn't in my bag of tricks, God. God, would you do a miracle in our midst that it wasn't on my radar? Whoa! I didn't see that one coming to God, coming, Lord. Let me just take time and clap my hands jubilantly at what you did while I worked like crazy trying to figure out what I'm supposed to do. I have done that so that you will know, Moses, that I am Yahweh. That's the reason I'm doing it. I want to jump ahead 2,000 years to the New Testament. Brother Paul finds himself at that same place. Paul had worked and worked and worked like it depended on him. You may remember his resume in Philippians chapter 3. I've been circumcised the 8th day of the stock of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, Hebrew of the Hebrews. He gives his whole resume. Look what I did. And then he comes along in verse 7. But everything that was a gain to me, I've considered it to be a loss because of Christ. More than that, I also consider everything to be a loss in view of the surpassing value of knowing Christ Jesus, my Lord. Verse 10, I've jumped. You can go read those between the beginning of verse 8 and verse 10. Verse 10, my goal in life, Paul says, is to know Him. And I want to know the power of His resurrection. You know what that is, Darla? You know what that is, Ada? That is His resurrection power. I want to know resurrection power. I want to know the power of His resurrection and the fellowship of His sufferings, being conformed to His death. You can keep reading that passage. Paul says, I want to know Him. I want to experience resurrection in power in my life. That's miraculous power. Paul says, I want to be in fellowship with Jesus. If that means that Jesus suffered, if I want to be in the fellowship of His sufferings, if Jesus suffered, I'm all right suffering too. Being conformed to His death. If Jesus died, I'm all right dying too. As long as I know. As long as I know this wonderful, awe-inspiring, miraculous, rock-writing God, prayer-answering, miraculous God. I want to know that God. Because I want to know Him. Jump ahead another 2,000 years. I challenge you with this. God still has miraculous tricks in His bag. He is not a distant, transcendent God sitting far away, watching the world with His arms crossed, wondering what is going to happen next down here on planet Earth. He today is doing miraculous work. He is acting on behalf of His people. He is aligning the elements so that His plans and purposes will be fulfilled on this earth. God is involved in our world. He is involved in your life and in my life. And He is calling you and I right now. You bow your heads. Clayton, what are you challenging us to do today? Well, I'm challenging you to pray this prayer along with me today. God, would you send me on a Moses-like adventure? Would you allow me to see your miraculous signs? Would you allow me to experience your resurrection power? I hope you're praying that. Would you give to me some miraculous stories that I can pass on to my children and my grandchildren? God, would you allow me to know you in the same way that you longed for Moses and Pharaoh and the Apostle Paul to know you? Would you allow me to know you in that same way? I pray in Jesus' name. Amen.